everybody. Welcome to the Night Raven podcast, and I want to welcome truth seekers, storytellers, and lovers of the unknown. Remember, the Night Raven is a show of its own, but it's also a network for the like minded voices and for those who believe in the power of storytelling and sharing wisdom and information to change the world for the better. Today, I have somebody with me. Um, I don't even know where to begin to introduce her because she's just so great and she's my mentor and she is somebody who taught me so much as far as like readings go. And I'm just so glad she's here and I'm going to read her bio in a moment. But before we get there, just wanted to all let you know, stay curious, stay awake, and question everything. And with that said, I will read her bio real quick so you guys know where or what we're talking about today. So, I mentioned before her name is Grace Lindsay, and Grace Lindsay is an Akashic record expert and Reiki master with over 20 years of professional experience. She's a master teacher of beginning and advanced Akashic classes, which I have taken, by the way. And if you ever thought about taking an Akashic class, please contact her. She is really, truly one of the best. And she's also a gifted Akashic record reader. Grace has done Akashic record readings from coast to coast and internationally as well. She's widely acknowledged for her skill and compassion in bringing forth meaningful information from the record. I can attest to that because everybody I know wants to have readings with her because she's just so spot on. And she's one of the only people that I will get readings from. And that really says a lot. She's also passionate about introducing others to the Akashic Records through readings, classes, meditations, events, and healing sessions. She also does something really cool because Grace has pioneered Akashic Reiki. It's a potent modality that combines the healing properties of Reiki with the high vibrational wisdom of the Akashic Record to form a powerful foundation for transformation. Grace has a master's certifications in 3 Reiki disciplines with additional training in nervous system energy work. Grace gives Akashic record readings and Akashic Reiki sessions both in person and remotely online via Zoom video conferencing. And I will blend her website in later so you all have it fresh in your minds. But I want to say thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. First of all, thank you for your kind words and your beautiful introduction. And I want to say about your own introduction, just now is the first time I've seen your incredible graphic intro of Night Raven. That's beautiful in and of itself, but I love the tagline that said, because sometimes the answers are found in the shadows. Because I thought, well, how apropos for what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the inner child, because the inner child has so much to do with the inner shadows, the inner
Yes.
world, sometimes our blind spots, but all that relates to the subconscious and the psyche. So very
That is
apropos, and I
correct.
loved your intro.
Yeah. I mean, your bio currently, I mean, it's all about the Akashic Records, right? But you have so many skills and talents, and you're just so deep that I really wanted to just ask you and discuss with you some other things that you're really good at. And that's what for today would be what? The inner, what do we call it? The inner child work session? What do you call it, Grace?
That's what I'm calling it, inner child work, or exploring your, uh, getting to know your own inner child better, cultivating a relationship with your own inner child.
Cool. So I do know a little bit about it. I mean, it's something that people in the community talk about, and by community, I mean like metaphysical community. Everybody's talking about, inner child work and healing and shadow work. So I'm wondering, is shadow work the same as inner child work, or is it something different?
Oh, I love that question. I mean, it's very related, but I would say it's also different. And actually that I did want to start out by saying, here's my definition of inner child, because it
Please,
probably means a
please
lot
do.
of things
Yes,
to a lot of
yes,
people.
please.
And first I'll just say, of all the things I do, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor. And there are people with those certifications and degrees who do specialize in inner child work.
Right.
But part of the point of today's discussion with you is, you don't have to be super trained with a big certification in order to work with your own inner child. And
Mm-hmm.
I hope that our discussion really makes people curious about wanting to work with their own inner child in whatever way. So, having said
Right,
that,
right. Hmm.
my definition of inner child is it's the child that you once were, if you're now an adult, of no matter what age. But it's not just the memories that you have of your childhood at any given age, it's the part of you when you were a child that's really still alive and communicating with you, alive in your psyche, alive in your subconscious. And it's communicating with you, but usually not at all directly, indirectly. And that's how it can be very related to shadow work, because we don't see the shadows, and we don't see what's in the shadows, and we don't see really how our inner child is communicating with us. But what part of my definition of what is the inner child is, it's part of us that went through things in childhood that were difficult and sometimes even traumatizing. And it's our reaction to what those difficulties and traumas were. And it is the meaning that we gave at the time, that's what gets frozen in development, if you will, and what gets wired into the nervous system and into the psyche. And that's how they're still alive today within us.
Wow.
And so, it's, for me, I'm about all things spiritual, and I know you are too, Bettina.
I am too,
And
yes.
exploring inner child work and shadow work, and there's other names that we can call it by. It is so much a part of our spiritual path, in my opinion, because our soul chose to incarnate and come into a body and walk this earth and live this life, especially in this day and age that we're living in, to explore the richness of what it's like, first of all, to be a human, but also what it is like to bring higher consciousness down into the lower consciousness of this body, of this planet, of this 3D world that we live in. And it is, we're not, zombies just walking around
Yeah.
with just our soul. We are so complex, and we have an ego, and we have an inner child, and we have other parts with us. There's a lot of, some people are very familiar with internal family systems, IFS. That is
Okay.
related to the inner child, although a little different too. But that's where you work with your inner critic, your inner saboteur, your inner controller, your inner planner, organizer, your inner overwhelmed, shut down part. That's called parts therapy. That's very related to the inner child. But what I like about calling it the inner child is that we do as adults remember our childhood typically, or at least parts of it, and we can relate so much to that thing that happened to us when we were 3 years old, or how we felt when we first started kindergarten at 5. And technically, although we all have an inner child, technically we have inner children,
Hmm.
because our experience of life as a 3-year-old was very different than our experience of life as a 10-year-old, which was very different than our experience of life as a 15-year-old. And so all of those ages count. And more importantly, all of the meaning that we gave to what happened to us at those ages count. And so my experience is that often what happened to us when we were very young, if it was difficult, it caused us to either go into overwhelm or shutdown, or perhaps great sadness, as well as things like feeling not loved or not deserving of love. Whereas if something difficult happened to us as a teenager, a young teenager, for example, maybe by now that sadness that has been there for so long has now crystallized into anger, or into defiance, or into so much frustration that some action is taken. And that is a very different level of feelings than the young child, even though the two may be related. So that's what I
Wow.
mean by
Wow.
inner child work.
Wow, that's true. I have so many questions already. One thing I want to say though, I do notice that globally, or in the Western country at least, it's going it's becoming part of the professional world. My childhood best friend, she became a preschool teacher and then a kindergarten teacher, and even they have figured out that they have influence on those little souls, and I mean they can only partly protect them, but they already see or recognize that what happens to those children in their childhood really affects them in adulthood. And she is so passionate about that that she actually went to school, she got a degree, and she's going to make sure that this is going to be recognized in the German school system. And so
Wow.
I feel like it's catching on. You know, it was only, well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know for sure, but for me, it was just always a metaphysical term, you know, oh, you got to do your inner child work, you got to do your shadow work. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, you know, but I didn't realize that, I didn't realize that it's catching on, you know, even on the outside, so to speak, you know.
Oh,
So
that's fascinating.
I just wanted to throw that out there. But then I have a
Yeah.
question. I have a question, and I think it's going more into like you may have to even channel the Akashic records a little bit because, I can't help it, Grace. You know how spirit is. It just puts all these questions into my head, and I'm thinking, I don't remember much of my childhood, and sometimes people say if you don't remember much of your childhood, that just means nothing bad has happened to you. Would you say that is true? I mean, what if you don't remember your childhood? Can you still have triggers and things that affect you, and then you still have to do your inner child work? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Absolutely. If you don't remember your childhood, I would say really that's all the more reason to do inner child work. And I want to say, in answer to your question, which is true for all inner child work, if you don't remember your childhood, I'm sure there's a good reason for that.
Hmm.
And I feel a lot of compassion for even you saying that and for me answering that, because if you don't remember it, or if anyone doesn't remember their childhood, there was likely a good reason to forget. It's not
Wow.
amnesia, or
Yeah,
dementia or
yeah.
something like that. And so what I will say is those parts, or that inner child who experienced perhaps something so difficult that it got repressed so deeply that you have no physical memory of it, it's still alive within you. It's certainly still
Mm-hmm.
being held in your nervous system, as well as maybe the trauma itself, if there was a trauma, is being held at the cellular level in your tissues of your body. And it's alive, meaning that it can still bubble up and
Mm-hmm.
communicate with you or come out sideways. And that is usually how it happens, that something gets triggered and it triggers a fear, that inner child goes into usually total protection mode. Oh no, oh no, it sounds like what happened a long time ago. Don't want that to happen. We got to protect, we got to
Mm-hmm.
protect. But it's not telling you that directly. You're not having a direct awareness of, oh, this is just my inner child, very triggered right now by that thing that happened when I was 3. Usually it speaks to us in different ways. It shuts us down,
Hmm.
or it causes us to go into overwhelm, or causes us to go into fear, or maybe anxiety. I think sometimes anxiety attacks that come out of nowhere are brought on by the fear that got triggered from an inner child, even if you have no idea why and memories are repressed. So that's why I
Okay.
say all the more reason why it's helpful to do inner child work. But the way, if you don't have memories, I want to say the way to start is connect with the inner child, even if you don't feel hurt or it.
Mm-hmm.
Connect with um, the knowingness that I know I don't have many memories from childhood, but I know there has to be a reason for that. Even if I don't remember the reason, let me connect with that. So you connect with whatever you start with what you do have, and then you just sit with that. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but it's appropriate to answer your question. I think the most important thing when we're doing inner child work and working with our inner child is to first of all meet it with curiosity and openness, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to more shame or judgment or blame or guilt that it's probably already feeling, or shut down, but also as opposed to really trying to heal it. Because us as eager beaver adults who are on a spiritual path, who just want to help our inner child and just heal it and have it not be afraid anymore,
Yeah.
it's really important that we not rush that process, and that really we're just so willing to sit with the inner child, sit with it in compassion. Oh, I remember how you feel. Yeah, that was me a long time ago. Or I feel how scared you are. To to sit with it can be the most comforting thing, as opposed to, oh, I know you're scared, let's heal that immediately. And there are good healing modalities out there, whether it's tapping or working in the Akashic records like you and I do, or a million other things. There are good healing modalities, but I think the most important thing to know, especially in the beginning, is you just want to meet it with an open curiosity, and you want to sit with it and be with it and allow it to be, as opposed to recognize it and rush through to, now let's heal it. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes total sense. Yes. I guess, yeah. I mean, it's a process, I'm guessing, with like everything else, you don't get healed overnight. When
Yeah.
you have Reiki treatments or whatever treatments, or, God forbid, cancer treatments, it's not something, I mean, it's a process. Whatever you do as far as healing goes, it's a long process. And I think
Yeah.
being in the spiritual community and being a reader, and, I know that I feel like, or my belief is that to heal your soul is much more painful than to heal you physically. That's just what I believe, and um I have so many questions, but I'm going to let you go on with because I
Well,
know you,
sure.
I know,
Yeah.
and
I mean, you're bringing up so many things I want to
I
respond
know.
to too, and I could go off on a tangent on any of these, but especially what
I
you just
know.
said
It's
about
just I
healing
know.
the
Yeah.
soul. But there are two things that I will say about working with inner child. One relates to this idea of trauma, that we experienced trauma at any different level in our childhood, and then we made a meaning around that trauma. I think that's important to understand that, first of all, trauma comes in many different forms. And so,
Mhm.
trauma, of course, can mean physical or emotional or sexual abuse when we were a child, and that's tragic. But there's a lot of other forms of trauma that are equally taxing on our inner child and taxing on our nervous system. So, for example,
I agree.
losing your house to a wildfire or a
Mhm.
flood, or some
Mhm.
natural disaster, an earthquake, where all the safety, all the security, all your wonderful toys in your bedroom and your own bed, suddenly all of that's gone, and you're having to live in the gym of a local high school for a while. I mean, that can be very traumatizing.
Mhm.
Likewise, if you had a childhood illness that put you in the hospital for a long time, or a lot of pain, that can be traumatizing. Or even something like, let's say you fell out of a tree when you were in the third grade and broke your leg, and it was very painful. And eventually you healed and you could walk again, but you never were the same after that. You never were the same, probably physically, in terms of being able to run and all that, quite the same, but you're also not the same emotionally. And then, to that thought, I want to add something. I find this so fascinating. There is a pretty famous study called the ACEs study, which is ACES study.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it is a study that was done by the CDC, or at least championed by the CDC. Started back in 1998, but there's been certainly more iterations since then. And what they found was that the more trauma that a child experiences in childhood, and I just put trauma in air quotes because what they call trauma is adverse childhood experiences. So the ACE
Mhm.
is adverse childhood experiences. The more trauma, or ACEs, that a child experiences in childhood, the higher and the stronger the correlation with illnesses that manifest in adulthood. And by illnesses,
Wow.
I do mean things like cancer or those kind of illness, or a disease kind of an illness, but also depression, anxiety, addictions, or it leads to addictions because you're just looking for something to control that inner. And so that was very eye opening for a lot of people, scientists and psychologists, and a lot, to see that the more trauma a child is exposed to, the more it stays with them. And just growing older doesn't make it go away. And it then manifests in their adult years, even like 50 years later. Because the first
Wow.
study, I think their average age of this very comprehensive study with thousands of subjects and very longitudinally tracking over time, the average age was 57. And so they were looking at incidences of heart attacks and disease and all that. And so one big correlation they found was the more trauma in childhood, the more likely adult onset disease. But their definition of trauma was not just the big wildfire burning down everything, or even abuse. It was divorce in the home, or
Mm-hmm.
one parent being incarcerated and or neglect as well as abuse. And I mean physical, mental, emotional, all those aspects of abuse or neglect. And so that's very eye-opening because even in this day and age where there's a lot more resources on good parenting, healthy parenting, who among us had parents who were conscious enough to always be a good, healthy parent? And even now, as we as parents, I mean, parents make mistakes. That just is part of being human. But still, to the point you made about your best friend in Germany, I love that she is studying this to bring this out more into the actual where it can be applied and take it out of just theory. But I mentioned the ACEs because that is a reason for us to want to do our own shadow work, our own inner child work, because it's not so that we don't get a disease, although none of us want to get that.
Yeah, 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 of
It's
course.
really more to come into our wholeness because there are so many parts of us. And sometimes it's a very young part of us, a traumatized part of us that's driving our bus. And we don't know it's driving the bus, except that we can look at the repeating patterns. And you and I have talked about this before that so often little kids, little children are wise and intuitive and very connected to spirit and the spiritual world in so many ways. And yet, by definition, little kids just don't have the cognitive development that an adult has to develop that deeper contextual understanding. And so the adult can understand, well, when my parents divorced and used to argue in front of me all the time when I was 4, it had nothing to do with me. It was all about them, and they were having arguments and they couldn't get along. But the 4-year-old who is hearing all that arguing often makes a meaning that is representative of where they are cognitively in their development, which is like, my parents are arguing and it must be my fault,
Yeah.
especially if they perceive they have a part in it. My parents are arguing over money and how they're going to pay for my surgery or for my ballet classes or whatever. Often the meaning that a child takes when they hear something like that is better for me not to express my needs, A, and B, better for me just to not have needs. And
Wow.
that's a pretty common belief that many children, especially females, by the way, and they have done studies to show that little girls tend proportionally much higher than little boys to make
Mm-hmm.
beliefs that are all about it's my fault. And
Wow.
so that doesn't mean that no little boy feels that way, but
Yeah, of
proportionally
course.
speaking, it's more likely that a little girl will, for example, hear her parents arguing over money and think that it is her fault. And therefore, I won't express my needs for money because I don't want them to argue more. And I won't even have needs. And then that little girl grows up into a beautiful, wise adult woman who's incredibly giving and nurturing and all that, and yet still frozen in her own ability to express needs, to ask for what she wants, to ask for help in any way. And she's just so used to powering on through life, just being so self-sufficient and not needing anything from anyone because that's how she's been her whole life, that is just an example of how of the importance of what happens when a little kid reacts to something and makes a meaning of it. And of course, not every little girl is going to make a meaning of that when she hears her parents argue, but it is, I think, a powerful example of how the meaning we make as little kids gets locked into a belief pattern in our nervous system, and we have no clue about that as we grow up into adults. And yet we're still operating from that operating system.
Wow. What you just said, I mean, the woman that you talked about is me. You just described me. I, I mean, like I
I
said,
did not mean to, but
I can't
I'm trying to
remember a
get
whole.
close to home.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, I can't say I had a traumatic childhood, but I guess I don't remember some of it, and maybe that's what it was. But and I talked to other friends about this, and people who know me, I am hyper independent, and it doesn't always serve me. I just like I better not depend on anybody. I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to accept help because the only one I can depend on is me. So that's
Exactly.
how I grew into. And I guess maybe it would be not fun but interesting to figure out when that happened. So I'm definitely not victim. I don't want to say I'm a victim of childhood stuff, but in a way, we all are. I mean, even when people say, "Oh, my childhood was great," well, you were still a kid and you still went to school, and you probably had somebody in your life who was mean to you or made an impression. So we
Yeah.
all were kids and we all have something that we're taking from that. And so, but for me, I kind of figured out already, what it is and why I'm so hyper independent.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe it's good for me to explore it. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's even more important to explore where all that's coming from, you
I
know?
would I would champion that, and yet I'll also say a couple things about that. So first of all, once the belief gets set in our nervous system, and that happens usually when we're pretty young and not aware of it, then we operate from that. And so the belief starts out picturing as we become an adult. And so I'm guessing, I won't say this is true for you, but I'll say it was true for me, that as women who are very independent and very self sustaining and have learned through the school of hard knocks, the only person I can really rely on is me. So I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to ask myself for help or ask anyone else for help. And oh, by the way, I will pride myself on that. I'll think that's a really good thing about
Yeah.
me. But what we also find then in our patterns is, and by golly, how is it possible I married a man, or I'm in relationship with someone, whether you marry or not, I'm in relationship with someone who just further exacerbates that. I can't count on him. He doesn't want to help me. He doesn't want me to ask for help. He likes it that I'm independent. And so
Mhm.
the pattern
Mhm.
just keeps reinforcing itself until, as you just said, you're really willing and curious enough to look at it. And I would say it can be helpful to trace it back to the root cause. Oh, the first time I remember that happening is when I was 3. I think that can be very helpful. But even if you never get to trace it back to the original memory, I think what's more helpful is that you recognize, wow, that's in the operating system, in the
Mhm.
subconscious. It drives my bus more than I realize. And if I don't want that pattern to keep perpetuating, I have to do something to change it. And and so what you want to do then is come from the wiser part of you rather than from the part of you that is still in that frozen development.
Mhm.
And from that wiser part, say something like, well, if I wanted to change this pattern, would I need to learn something new? Would I need to do something new? What would I need to do? Even just asking that in a theoretical sense, what would I need to do if I wanted to stop this pattern and not do the same old, to keep circulating it? And then when you ask yourself that, typically something will pop up in your mind. Well, I might have to learn how to go do XYZ and take schooling, or I might actually have to gather the courage in my voice to ask for help, or I might start with something easier than asking for help, but it's a little thing. The real thing, in addition to identifying what that root source of the cause, the first cause memory of it is, well, if I want to change it now after all these years and decades as an adult, what's one way I might be able to start changing it? Let me kind of think about it now so that I can expand my framework of how I think about it, but also so that the next time I see myself in that pattern, I will have already thought about, oh, when this happens, I will do X or I will respond Y. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes total sense. And one more question before
Yeah.
I'm sure you have something, you have a plan, but I haven't, I'm sure you I'm just keep asking you a question because it's just so interesting. And how spirit is, once again, it's just so many things coming in. But spirit is giving me a memory. You and I having or going on a road trip. It's been a few years. I can't remember where we went or where we came from. But we always have good conversations in the car. And I remember I did talk to you about like relationships, like romantic relationships, and you said something to me that I now remember that makes sense, and it ties into this topic today. You said
Tell me.
something about all the impressions that you have from age 0 to 7,
Oh, yes.
um, comes back out as soon as you get married. So I wonder what's it about that that factor about marriage that brings out the first 7 years and what you learn or experience in those first 7 years of your life? Why are they so impactful? And will it stop after 7 years? Will you not take on anymore? You know?
I love the question. So two answers. The first is the 7 years has to do with a quote from Bruce Lipton,
Mm-hmm.
and his biology belief that every child is just this blank slate from birth or zero up to about the age of 7. And everything that is happening to them in life, in their home, in their dynamic, and then at the beginning of school, like preschool or kindergarten, that's all being written on them. And they're making meaning of all that. And then after about the age of 7 or 8, that becomes their permanent operating system.
Oh,
And we do
wow.
operate from that for the rest of our life. So to me, that's pretty scary, because even if you try to be a good parent, or in your friend's case, a good teacher of kindergartners, we never know how they're reacting to what we're saying or doing, but especially if any caregiver or parent is rather unconscious
Mm-hmm.
as they're doing that thing. So that leads me to the other thing that has the you talked about the first 7 years come out so much when we marry. When those first 7 years, we are totally imprinting like a little duckling on its mama duck or its parent duck. We're totally imprinting the role modeling that we're seeing of our mother as a mother, of our father as a father, and of their marriage as this is what a marriage looks like. And so now,
Okay.
flash forward decades later, and we get married. um, One thing I may have said to you on that road trip was, when you marry someone, you're also marrying their parents, even though you don't realize it, but you're
Yes.
marrying the role modeling that those parents gave to your spouse, that for some reason tend to come out after the wedding ring goes on. People can date for a long time, even live together for a long time. And sometimes those old underlying things that are in the subconscious don't rise to the surface until it's permanent, with a wedding ring, with the whole everything that went with the marriage ceremony. And
Oh,
it's a lot harder to undo now, if you go through
oh
divorce.
yes.
And
Now you're in it.
yeah, exactly. And what I find is that that's when these modern people who have lived together and it was all good and in love, suddenly now they revert back to the way they saw their own parents role modeling what it means to be married, which has to do with the role of husband and wife, the role of male and female, the role of breadwinner versus homemaker, or both breadwinners. I mean, it's complex, but
Wow.
it is. I mean, isn't it amazing that we all somehow get through life relatively successfully? I mean,
I
mistakes
know,
along the way, but
yeah. I know
we've
we're
got
all
a lot in
spiritual
our
being
pocket.
we're all spiritual beings, right? Having a human experience, but listening to all of that, everything that can impact us and our life and our soul and it's like I feel like we don't have a chance on this planet in this school of life. I mean, we're like I just trying to survive here, It's like we don't have a chance, right? So I guess if you want a partner, maybe you just need somebody as crazy as you are and maybe call it good. Like I mean,
Yeah.
it's healing is good and I hope we all get to heal ourselves, but I feel like you need somebody who's on your level as well, somebody who I guess your soulmate, or your twin flame or whatever they call it.
Well, that's a help, because then the love becomes the glue that gets you through the hard times. But I would say, I think the biggest key to exactly what you just said about getting through is to have healthy communication tools that, first of all, don't accuse or blame or cause people to get defensive or shut down, but more importantly, that can really lift part of the iceberg up higher out of the water that's been hidden under the surface of the water.
Oh, that's
And
a good one.
that thing of the part of the iceberg that's being lifted is, oh, the way you're talking to me right now, I wonder, did your parents talk to each other that way when you were little? Did you see that role modeled? If you can say that, or some version of that, in a calm way that is not accusing, it can really be a door opener to a healthy conversation. And, well, let me think about how my parents, what did they role model for
Mhm.
me?
Mm-hmm.
it is certainly possible to explore that in a way that not only leads to insights and expansion and growth, but causes the couple to get closer together, as opposed to, there you go again, you sound just like your father. Not that you would ever do that, but
Sure.
there's a way to communicate in a way that shuts down conversation or in a way that expands it. But
Yeah.
most of us don't even know about that. Most of us don't even know to say something like, I'm curious, what kind of role modeling did you see from your parents when you were, especially when you were little? When they argued, did they argue behind closed doors? Did they argue in front of the kids? Asking a question like that can really lead to a productive conversation, especially if it's like, I don't want us to argue in front of our kids, or
Mm-hmm.
I think it's healthy to argue in front of our kids, whatever the position might be. But so many of us, there are so many things we never talk about, in part because we don't even know to, but also, as open and freewheeling as our society is, especially in the West and here in America, there's a lot of things that are kind of still taboo to talk about. And I think
Interesting.
how people relate to each other and at a level of intimacy maybe is one of them. We don't even have words for it necessarily.
I agree. I agree. Well, I certainly learned something already, but I we can't unravel my life here in about 30 minutes. It's not possible, but I need to come and see you. I already know that. So you and I, we need to get together. But
Well, I
I
would love
brought you
to.
on here because I want everybody else who watches this to learn from you today. So if there's anything you want to say or maybe present or let people know how you do the work that you do, please and go ahead and let
Oh,
us know.
well, first of all, that's very sweet the way you asked that. And yes, I'm happy to share with that because, first of all, there are lots of experts out there. If you were to Google inner child, there are so many experts. Margaret Paul and Misa Hopkins are two of, I've experienced their work, and that's very powerful. There's great people of internal family constellations. There's lots of great experts out there to help you. And in addition to that, working in the Akashic Records, which you and I both do, and we know how to do, that is a beautiful medium to bring forward the voice of the inner child, especially if we feel like we're not connecting with it ourselves. And so if anybody would like help with that, Bettina and I are both more than happy to open the Akashic Records and help with that, or teach you how to open your records. There's that too.
Exactly. Hmm.
But really, where I really want to say is, but you don't have to turn to an expert, whether they're an Akashic record reader or an industry expert like Margaret Paul, for example, to communicate with your own inner child. And that's really the biggest thing I want to emphasize in this discussion today, Bettina, is that we all have an inner child or inner children.
Hmm.
And the more that we can just reach out and communicate with them at whatever simple level we can, I think the healthier it is. And especially if in the beginning, as I said earlier, if you don't have memories of childhood, how about starting by sitting in a rocking chair or sitting in a non rocking chair, but rocking a little bit? Put your hands over your stomach and just hold the intention. I want to connect with my childhood. I want to connect with
Hmm.
my inner child. And if you don't feel your inner child, I want to connect with my childhood because that inner child wants to connect with you and really is communicating with you. It's just communicating in a way that we as adults don't recognize. It's communicating through fear or shutdown or anxiety or depression or sadness or whatever that might be, as opposed to, hey, I'm 3 years old and I'm really feeling overwhelmed right now. It doesn't communicate that well that way unless you really start establishing a dialogue with it. And so I think that the reason why I say put your hands over your stomach is because your inner child really is part of your nervous system and it's in your
Hmm.
psyche. And
Hmm.
yet in the body, I often think of it as hanging out in the stomach area because it's what gives you that nervous stomach, that
Yes.
dread in the pit of your stomach, that heaviness in the pit of your stomach when it gets triggered because it's suddenly afraid, or the butterflies in your stomach, or however you want to say that. And so if you put your hands over your stomach and just rock a little, rocking is first of all very nurturing. It's like that mothering motion
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
being rocked as a
Mhm.
baby. And it's soothing to the nervous system, but it's also soothing to the inner child. So if you start that way and you're just holding the space of I want to connect, it might take a while, especially if your inner child never has communicated directly with you. It might take a while for it to even trust you.
Yeah.
There's something to think about, but also it
Mhm.
might take a while for you to hear it. But any step is a helpful step. And you said something earlier, Bettina, that I think is so true. It's not a one and done thing. You don't just have one conversation with your inner child and then you live happily ever after.
Yeah.
It it doesn't have to be a daily thing, but a regular thing. The consistency is so important to a child, just as it was important to you as a child or to any
Mhm.
child.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
especially, it is my feeling is that most when we were little kids and we had to go through difficult things, whether that difficult thing was bullying at school or a dysfunctional home environment, whatever it was, or problem at a babysitter's house, little kids just had to get through it. And so typically a little kid felt very alone. They had to figure it out all by themselves. Often they felt like they couldn't tell anybody else out of shame or fear or guilt or whatever that emotion was. And that left them not only feeling very alone and isolated in that moment that you're actually going through that as a 3 year old, but then as the 3 year old grew up into a 53-year old, and the 3 year old is still kind of shut down in the psyche or in the nervous system, it it takes it's been ignored for, let's say, 50 years. It's been not listened to in a direct way for 50 years. So it will take a while for it to be willing to open up. And yet I just know that if you hold that intention, I'm here for you. You hold the intention, especially now that I'm an adult, I want to parent my inner child in a way that I didn't get parenting when I was little. I,
Mhm.
I want to say to my child, sweetheart, I hear you and I'm here for you now. And I know you may have felt neglected for the past 50 years, but you have my intention now. I'm here for you now. I think that's the most reassuring message that we can give our inner child. And it's lovely if we say it once, but it's more powerful if we say it once a week, or after that, over time, because you're really trying to reverse a feeling that an inner child might have had for decades of, you never listened to me, I've been ignored. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Makes total sense. I totally feel everything you say. It's just so powerful and so impactful. And I'm just so glad you're talking about it with me or with me in this show, on this show. Um, almost every sentence you say, I'm like, I start remembering things from my childhood now, Grace, you know? Um, I don't know. It's just maybe I was born into the wrong culture. I mean, you know me, I was born and raised in Germany, and German parents are good parents, but they're just not as touchy-feely, you know? And
Yeah,
maybe that's what I needed. Nobody ever asked me how my day was when I came home from school or kindergarten. I mean, it's like a what doesn't kill you make you stronger kind of a
yeah,
culture, you know? It's like and
yeah,
so I guess I never learned some of those things, but I wonder if this is also cultural, you know, not just for me, but maybe other cultures
yeah.
on this planet, you know, where you know what I mean?
Oh,
Where it's
I
not just
totally,
like
and
which
not,
parents you have, but also where you were born and raised.
yes. So first of all, culture, absolutely. Whether that's an Asian culture versus a European culture, there's that. But I'll add one thing to that, and I'll add it by sharing an example of someone shared this with me. He's a man, and I'll his this is not his name, but I'll call him Jack, and he's in his 60s already, and he's really been trying to do inner work and trying to connect with his inner child, and he just wasn't hearing anything. He really wanted to connect with his inner child, but he wasn't hearing things. So one night, as a 60 something, he gets into bed and he pulls the covers up, just trying to, get them situated. He pulls it up over his head for a moment. And in that moment, he had this realization, because he was going to pull him right back down and put it around his neck. But as it went over, he suddenly had this memory. Oh, when I was a little boy, the only time I really felt safe was when I was in my bed and the covers were pulled over me and I felt hidden and protected.
Wow. Yeah.
And so in that moment, he had the foresight to say to his inner child, whom he called Jackie, or the boy was, called Jackie as a little boy, he said, Jackie, are you here? As the blanket was so pulled over his head, it was dark, and he immediately heard a voice in his head say, yes, and I'm bad. And
Wow.
that's heartbreaking. And yet, I mean, how wonderful that he heard it. But the reason why I'm sharing that to answer your question is because he had parents who I'm sure loved him when he was little, but they were belonging to that old school, that cultural belief that the way that you raise children is, first of all, children should be seen and not heard.
Mm-hmm.
Children need to just obey and
Mm-hmm.
go along to get along, but they need to not speak out too much and certainly not act out and not throw temper tantrums and all that. And so people who were raised that way and therefore parented that way themselves, they not only ruled through keeping children in line through punishment, but often through the threat of punishment. And so, if you don't do this, then you'll get a spanking, or that's what I mean by threat of punishment. And little Jackie had parents who parented in that manner, either through direct punishment or through the threat of punishment. And so little Jackie was a normal little boy. He wasn't a bad boy, but he
Mm-hmm.
heard it so much. You're bad, or don't be bad, or, and bless his heart, little Jackie grew up into a very responsible, kind man, but there's still a little boy in there who feels he's bad. And while that's
Wow.
heartbreaking that he heard that, I was just so happy to hear that, because that opens the door for a beautiful, what I'll call a reparenting conversation. Oh, sweetheart, Jackie, you're not bad. You were a little boy being a little boy. You were exploring the world. You were learning the rules of the game, of what it's like to grow up, and, et cetera, et cetera. You you don't rush to heal them, but you do want them to know what's true. And
Mm-hmm.
what's true is not you're bad to the core and you're always bad. It is sometimes you act up and sometimes you act out, and that's part of being a little boy and part of growing up. So you don't give them a how do I say? You find the middle line between it's all terrible and it's all good. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yes, it does. Wow. There's so many things that go into shaping the person that you become eventually when you grow up. There's just so many influences. It's wild to even think about that, and then you here stuck and you by yourself literally trying to unravel everything and undo the damage that has been done to you over like 50, 60 years. It's just so mind-blowing to think about that, you know?
It is mind blowing. And it leaves me in awe that most of us make it, that most of us are
Yes.
mature, responsible adults that try to be good parents to our own children, that try to, you know, be contributing citizens of the world, et cetera, et cetera. Because all of us were exposed to
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, whether that was conscious or
Yeah.
unconscious. And I will say, most people make mistakes unconsciously. They don't even know they're doing it. They don't know they're running an old default program. They don't. Um, they're not bringing consciousness to that moment because they're a bit on autopilot. And that is actually part of what Bruce Lipton said. Those first 7 years that go into filling the operating system of the person, as they're growing, as they're maturing, then from there on, we operate from that operating system by default or on autopilot, unless we make a very conscious effort not to. And so, what I said earlier to you about it's helpful to go back and find the root cause or the original source of whatever some pattern is. But what's even more helpful is to bring it into the present moment to say, I see I've been attracting this person or this kind of relationship in my life my whole life. I want to change that. What can I do to change that? The very asking that very question is how we come into more consciousness and we move out our default operating system, at least for a minute. And here's the
Mm-hmm.
thing that just amazes me. We're all operating on default unless we're making a conscious effort not to. And most of us don't stay conscious 24/7. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the rare
Yeah.
person, which means we rise to the occasion and we have consciousness, and then eventually we kind of fall back into the default. And that really is okay because that's part of being human. That's part of the human condition.
That's what I
And
say. I have a lot of readings when I go to fairs and I do readings, and sometimes this comes up, you know. They're always asking me things like, well, what's my next step? Or what do you think I should do? Or what does spirit have for me? And, you know, and sometimes I say something, they're like, yeah, I know that. I know already. I know I have to do all of that. But sometimes I'm just tired, you know, and maybe I'm just not good enough at that. And I always tell them, you know what? It's not about that. It's not about getting there and then staying there. It's about knowing that this exists. It's about raising your awareness, knowing that you fell off the wagon, you get back on it. It's always it's we're humans too. We have a human ego, and it's always trying to find a balance between your human ego and what spirit wants you to do. And it's not a battle, but it's like you have to be aware of it. You have to be conscious of it, you know, and then knowing, okay, well, I didn't do so good or didn't do so well, you know, let me get back on it and let me do my work. And I think
exactly.
that's what it's all about.
And knowing you're just being human when you keep breaking it. There's an old Sufi song that I remind myself a lot. And the phrase is, even though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, come again. And
Mm-hmm.
what it's saying is, I'll tell on myself. So I am a night owl and I stay up pretty late at
Yeah.
night because I can, because I don't get tired. I have a lot of energy. And yet
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's a lot better for my health if I not only were to go to bed earlier, but if I were to go to bed consistently at the same time every night and get up at the same time every morning. I've read that, in 1,000 different health places. But, and so I've said 1,000 times, tonight's the night I'm gonna go to bed earlier. And then oopsie, once again, it's way past midnight and whatever it is. And I will, when I go to bed, I'll be like, dang, I did it again. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'll think of that line, well, even though I've broken my vows 1,000 times, come again, meaning I can still try again. I can still try to bring more consciousness into it. Oh, and by the way, I have told myself, why don't you put up a little sign that says go to bed by 11:30, or don't, you must get off the computer by 11, because the computer is often why I stay up late. I kind of go down a wormhole. So that would be a good example of, if I see a
Mm-hmm.
repeating pattern and I can say, huh, there I go again. I do want to change this. What's one step I can take to change it? Well, how about if I put a sticky on my computer that says turn it off at 11, or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
How about if I
Mm-hmm.
put something on my mirror, that says XYZ? That's something little, and yet, my goodness, that's so doable.
Yeah.
That's not
Correct.
asking me to go get certification in some brand new program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. But I want to talk more about, you know, what you do with the inner child work.
Oh,
So
sure.
so when somebody comes to you and they want this done, what do you do? Do you open their records as well, or what does a session with you look like?
Oh, yet again, I love the question. So I'll answer that with a big picture and then something very specific.
Yep,
The big picture
absolutely.
is that, like you, I've been doing Akashic record readings for a very long time, in my case, 23 years. And these certainly can come up in an Akashic record reading. But what I find is that most people are viewing the reading as a one time event,
Mhm.
or once a year if they're going to have a reading at a fair. And so they have a lot of questions. And a year, well, more than a year ago, I decided to expand that Akashic practice to be more coaching. I call it Akashic coaching, which
Yes, I
means that you're
remember.
going to have
Mhm.
more than one session, because you're specifically wanting to address these kinds of things. And it's going
Mhm.
to take more than a 1 hour conversation, just like it's going to
Yeah.
take more than one day or 1 hour focusing on it. And so when people come to me now, I say, I can and I will open your Akashic records, but let's talk about the bigger structure of how we do that. That we're going to first of all look at where you want to be, what's the ideal that you would love to see yourself doing, Then we're going to talk about where you are right now. And then we're going to spend time talking about what's in the middle and what's in the way. What is holding you back? And oftentimes they have no idea. It's the repeating pattern, but they don't know it's tied to a belief they made in childhood or a meaning they made in childhood or whatever. And that takes a bit of time to uncover. And so the way that I do it now is that I rather than I incorporate these concepts into an Akashic record reading, now I like to incorporate Akashic record readings into this larger framework of let's talk about where you want to be, where you are, what's holding you back, and how to actually do pattern interrupts and get you to where you want to be, not by just hunkering down and fake it till you make it, or feel the fear and do it anyway, or set these big strategic goals, but to actually take all of yourself with you and stop repressing some of it, allowing it to rise to the surface. Because the truth is, any part of you that is holding you back is holding you back because it's trying to protect you. It's trying to protect you
Yeah.
from that bad thing that happened a long time ago, but it's also trying to protect you from the fear of that bad thing happening. So that's an important distinction, because often it will stop us way, way, way short of the bad thing that might happen. Not only will it not let us ever go into the ocean again because we thought we almost drowned in the ocean when we were a little kid, but
Yeah.
like we won't go in any body of water, and not even a swimming pool, or we don't like to close our eyes in the shower with the water. It'll stop us way short of the bad thing, because
Mm-hmm.
there's the fear of the bad thing, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
when you can recognize, oh, it's just here to protect me, even procrastination or something like that feels like it really gets in the way, it's a protective mechanism for something. And so the conversation becomes, well, let's talk about that. And one thing that I am embracing more and more in my own life, as well as working with clients, is let's talk about the resistance itself. Because you have a fear, or an inner child has a fear of something, and it throws up the protective mechanism, which can often be the resistance. And the resistance might be procrastination, is one example, but there's lots of other examples of resistance. Well, perfectionism, certainly, and the fear of the judgment, personal inner judgment as well as outer judgment, that's another example. But anyway, to look at the resistance itself, to understand how that resistance is protection and is trying to protect, and then to dissolve away the need for that particular form of protection to help the resistance, or the part that's throwing up the resistance, to understand, oh, we have other ways to protect ourselves that are actually much more holistic and healthier and not so constrictive. All of that takes a bit of time to uncover. So that's why now the long answer to your question is, I like to have more than one conversation about that. And I also like to allow time in between the conversations for people to go off and live their life and let those awarenesses of patterns pop up, like, oh, I just caught myself doing that again, that's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Or evidence of the change. Look at that. I now am, I don't know, leaving a sticky note for myself at night, and I'm going to bed at a decent time every night, and look at this change that's already come out of it. I mean, it's a way to notice not only the repeating pattern, but also the changes that are coming from the interrupted of the pattern, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And to
totally.
the previous point, doing that through the Akashic Records is a really beautiful way to do that, because we're accessing such a higher vibration of love and compassion. And so you and I are happy to do readings for others. We're happy to teach others how to work in their own records. But I will say that I'm also right now taking some training in learning how to talk directly to the superconscious, so that one doesn't do that through the Akashic Records. One goes straight to the superconscious to talk to it, trusting that it knows the best way to resolve repeating patterns and all of that. And I'm only just starting this, so I can't say, and here's how you do it.
Right,
But
right, right.
I am fascinated by that, because now it becomes as wonderful a tool as working in the Akashic Records is. Um, I think being able to teach people how to work with their superconscious is even more universal, if that makes sense, or maybe it's more accessible by more people who won't want to have a reading or learn how to open their own records. although both are wonderful tools.
So it's not part of every session that you do. It's just every once in a while, or it's not like a something that you okay, first we open the records and then we get into your inner child work. So it's not like that, right? Or
Um, I, for me, it's sequenced. And so the
okay.
first session is in the records, and then
Okay.
we talk about, and where are you now? And then a couple of meetings later, then let's open the records again. You could do it in every meeting. And certainly, if
Okay. Okay.
someone
Okay.
wanted to come for what I call a one off meeting or a one time meeting, of course, you can open the records and you can go straight to that topic. Let's talk about your inner child. I have certainly heard the voice of the inner child of someone whose records I just opened. And so of course, it's possible to do it in a one off reading. I just think for the person to actually affect change, more time is needed and more than one session is needed.
Okay. Okay. Good. Wow, that it just blows my mind, everything that just goes into being a human being is just incredible, and a healthy human being, or what I would consider like a healthy human being, like I guess we make it, like you said, we're surviving and we're thriving in some way, and so wow, there's a lot that goes into that, and I guess
There is one
survive.
final thing I'll say about that is I'm in awe, not only the fact that most of us turn out pretty well, and especially because I feel like we walk through life with a blindfold on and we're kind of playing blind man's bluff and bumping into things because we don't remember who we are or why we came here, and yet we still accomplish it. That's because I think we're hearing the guidance of our soul. But one thing I'm also in awe of is the fact that when a soul chooses to incarnate, and then its presence, its fully essence animating spirit comes into a body, it's a very important part of the body, but it's not all of who we are. we
Yeah.
we also have an ego, and we have all these inner parts, the controller and the planner and the all that, and we have our personality, and we're a Leo, or we're the
Mhm.
Aquarian, or we're the
Yes.
Piscean, and you name the personality system. We have all these complex personality aspects too, and our soul absolutely can guide us, but it's other parts of us have what I call a vote too. So our conscious mind has a vote, but all these inner children, sometimes they're the ones doing the vote, like, no, no, I will not do that, or I will not go there. Or, like when I think
Yeah.
about even someone, I'll give a famous example. Barbara Streisand has said that there was a time when she had such stage fright that it was absolutely crippling, and that felt she could not go on stage, so she would not go on stage. Now, this is Barbara Streisand, who is pretty world famous for being on stage and singing and acting and dancing and all of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to me, she's a good example of having a vote, because she had an amazing talent and her soul was guiding her and no doubt opening doors for her to express that talent. And yet she had a part of her that was voting by saying, nah, I don't care if I have talent. I cannot make myself go on stage right now. I would
Mhm.
rather stay small or stay invisible or stay hidden or whatever that thing was. And so I'm in awe that our soul can work with all of that, and it wants to work with all of that. It comes in saying, I want to experience humanness, and part of humanness is the ego, and is the little child, and is the shadow, and is the this and the that. And I think that's part of why soul incarnates. There's such deliciousness in bringing consciousness to all of that, in healing its own wounds, the soul's wounds, but also, I think, ultimately in bringing heaven down to earth and bringing higher vibration of love and compassion down into the lower vibration of where we live on earth. And a powerful way to do that is to bring it right down into our own body and our own
Mhm.
mind and consciousness.
What? Again, while you were talking, I'm like, I feel like not human beings, but our souls, our who we are on a soul level, or our beings, we're just such magnificent beings, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for coming here and experience this life and
That is
going
so
through
well
it.
said.
And Spirit just reminded me how magnificent we are, like how much courage we actually have, our soul has to be here and literally endure so many things that this 3D life has. And just don't ever forget that. I mean, and I mean anybody, just everybody, don't forget how magnificent you are, how magnificent your soul really is.
Oh, that's
And
so beautiful.
yeah.
I'm sure you've had this experience in the Akashic Records like I have. Of sometimes I always feel love for another person when I'm in their records, or love for myself, and it's love coming from the Akashic Record. But it's beyond love. There's so much respect, and there's so
Mhm.
even reverence for the courage that it took our souls to come into this 3D world and these bodies, knowing that we were going to forget who we were, knowing that we were going to feel like we have a blindfold on and we have to figure it out, and we're not accessing, that higher guidance that we could. There's so much respect for the fact that we would be willing to even come in and make and do this and bump into things and get hurt and make mistakes and all of that. There's great love and compassion for us, but I also often hear there's true respect. So you said it so perfectly. We are magnificent beings. We forget that about ourselves, but
Mhm.
who we know ourselves to be in this human lifetime and in this stage of our human life is not of all of who we are.
Yeah. Well said, Grace. I could talk to you forever. I need to have you come back sometime later and just talk about some things and some other topic maybe, because you're so wise. You have so many things you're such an expert in, and I really would like to bring that out. So hopefully
Thank
um
you.
you'll be back in the future. If
My
somebody
honor. I'd love
wants
to.
to, good. So if somebody wants to book anything with you, it's they can do it with your website or through your website. It's akashicgrace.com.
Exactly.
Um, guys, if you don't know her, just get a reading. Contact Grace. Grace is just exactly what her name is. It's she's Grace.
Oh,
Okay, and I've been through tough times, especially when I learned to be a reader because she was my teacher. And but gosh, I probably annoyed her for years after that, and with so many questions and so many insecurities, and she never flinched. So I just want you guys to know she's such an amazing reader. She's an amazing teacher. She's an amazing human being. If you don't know her, if you don't ever get a reading from her, you're missing out. So go ahead and just get it done. And
you
well,
are
we'll
so
see.
precious.
Yeah, it's
Now,
the truth.
I
It's
want
the
I
truth.
want you to have the last word, but I'm going to say this. You saying that and me looking at you now, knowing that you are hosting a podcast and doing so much more than that. Bettina, when I met you years ago, you never would have dreamed that you would even want to host a podcast, much
Mm-mm.
less be doing it, because you are not unlike Barbara Streisand in terms of your stage fright. I mean, I just remember you saying, "Oh no, no, not me on a stage. I'm no, no, no. I want to stay in the background." And look how far you've come. And you've
Mm-hmm.
come not because you just had the willpower to force yourself to do it. You've been on your own spiritual path, but you've been like a flower that has just unfolded. And when a flower unfolds its petals, the next thing that comes is just such a natural extension of that. And so, you hosting podcasts is just such a natural extension of everything you've done on your spiritual path before
Mm-hmm.
then. And I'm sure there's going to be lots more that are natural extensions going on from here after podcasting. But I'm in awe. I mean, I'm so proud of you, but I'm also so happy for you how you just keep stepping up to letting your
Yeah.
own petals of your flower unfold.
Oh, that's so nice of you. I have to give Spirit a lot of credit for that because in a way, I don't even know why I do certain things at the time I do them. I just know that Spirit will not leave me alone if I don't. So I just go ahead and do. But even the podcast, for example, and that's for everybody out there who's listening, I'm not doing this for me. It's really about, I want the information out there for everybody to access. And this is just another way of doing this. And so, and I'm just glad people like you exist and are open to coming on and talking about it. And yeah, that's really what it's all about.
Thank you.
But
I'm
yeah,
honored.
thank you guys. Thank you everybody for watching and listening. And give her a chance or give me a chance as well. I do readings as well. And again, Grace was my teacher, so it's all good. but I see you in
It
the
is
next
good.
episode. Yeah.
And Bettina
Mm.
is an amazing reader. And
Oh,
don't take my word for it. Heard many, we've done readings at fairs together, and I've heard many people say how blown away they were by Bettina's
oh,
readings as well. And by the way, Bettina knows how to teach others how to work in their Akashic records, as
I
do I.
do.
Bettina
Yep.
went through my teacher training. And so if you're ever wanting to learn that as a tool, contact Bettina as well, or me.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll
Yeah.
see you soon and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody, for
All right.
tuning in. Bye bye.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.